make calls based on data, not wildly guessing what might be wrong. Have analytics installed, track conversions, which should be obvious, but sometimes like things get lost. Understand how prospects interact with your page. So Hotjar or Clarity, whatever it is, if you don't know what's going on, you are just optimizing based on guesswork.
Hello, Sam. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Before I let you introduce yourself, actually, I forgot to ask, where exactly in the world are you?
So I'm based in North Carolina now.
North Carolina. Okay, yeah, because I know there's a bit of a time difference between us.
Just a little
Yeah, so
bit.
I thought maybe it good to start with if you could just intro yourself, let everyone know a bit about who you are, what you do, and your background.
Absolutely. So I am a B2B SaaS conversion copywriter and strategist. Mostly work with growing B2B SaaS startups that either realize they're not getting the conversions they need from their web copy, or realize that they need to adjust their copy and messaging because it no longer matches who they want to target. And that's becoming an increase, and that's becoming a problem for them.
So, what would how would you the whole conversion copywriting thing? How would you define that, and what is the difference between people that are doing this right and doing this wrong?
It, so for me, conversion copy is focused on getting somebody to do a thing, whatever it is. Sign up for a newsletter, sign up for a demo, start a free trial, go from free to paid. And doing it right versus doing it wrong, I think that might not be the nicest response, but I think direct response is basically conversion copywriting gone terribly wrong. Like the
So,
goal is the same, but it's based on like tricks and levers that are not necessarily aligned with what customers want or need, or prospective customers. And conversion copy is pursuing that goal, but it's based on understanding the prospective customers, not on like countdown timers.
yeah, it makes sense. So I guess I wanted to ask about your process when you start working with clients. What sort of process do you go through, and how do you start with auditing and things like that? And I guess what you're saying there, following on from that, what kind of things do you look for?
So I tend to like the research and discovery phase maybe too much. But in my experience, like the more time you spend there, the easier everything else is afterwards and the better results you get without endless cycles of optimization. Not that you shouldn't optimize, but it's just easier to get to better results if you start with a lot of research and discovery. And the things I'm looking for, first and foremost, are assumptions versus like data-based information. So a lot of times, marketing, sales, product, and customer success all have their own sets of assumptions about what makes customers tick, what they want, who the best customers are sometimes even. So I need to know where to take this information with a grain of salt and where to trust the internal data and spend less time on discovering those things, like by talking to customers, digging into data as necessary. And now I just want to talk about research and discovery forever. So Help me find my way back to the original question, please.
I do want to dig a bit deeper into that actually, because you mentioned sometimes there's discrepancies over who the ideal customer actually is, but you mentioned part of the process, which makes perfect sense, is talking to some of these customers. What if there is a lot of discrepancy amongst, about who is the ideal customer? So who do I talk to? How do you then dig a bit deeper into, okay, so I need to find the ideal customer first. How do you start digging into that first?
Well, I would say that this is an internal conversation first and foremost. So there needs to be an internal agreement on like product roadmap, who it's for, marketing channels, sales process, and it all has to be centered on that one ICP or maybe two ICPs. I don't know. Depends on how ambitious that company is. But without that internal agreement, a lot of the customer conversations will end up being along the lines of, is this even the right person for this company to target? And it's not a waste of my time, because talking to wrong people is so much worse than spending more time on talking to people during the discovery phase. But it certainly slows down the project and means that before we start optimizing the copy, we need to be talking about the product and the future direction and strategy. And ideal case scenario, this is not my decision, and this decision has been made before I was onboarded.
Do you ever have people saying, we're kind of torn between these avatars or these customer groups? Any advice for which one we should narrow down on, or should we go with all of them? Do you ever have people who are still a bit unsure, or do you just kind of leave it with them and just make sure they just narrow it down first before you get involved?
No, that absolutely happens. And in those cases, like as long as they are sufficiently defined and are grounded in existing customer segments, this is not an issue. It's just the question of what can I find out as I go through my customer interviews? What can I add to my script so that in addition to the questions I need answered for copy reasons, we also have this little window into what makes one segment better than the other one, short-term and long-term.
When it comes to asking those customers questions and trying to get as much insight as possible, there's probably loads you ask them, but are there any in particular questions that you find you get real value from, or do you find you just need to ask a whole broad range of questions to really get the value you need?
I think it's less about the range and more about the follow-ups. In my experience, if you try really hard not to ask leading questions, which you absolutely should do, then sometimes interviewees get a little unsure about what you want them to say. And a lot of times they kind of have their own assumptions about like what makes a customer interview a success. So to avoid this, I just want to tell you what you want to hear situation, or I'm not really sure what's relevant situation, I tend to ask a lot of follow-up questions.
Oh, okay. And with that, I guess that depends on what they answer, or do you have all of that planned in advance?
That very much depends on what they answer. Like sometimes it's just a very simple, let me make sure I understood you correctly, and then you rephrase it, and then it tends to be a yes, and also. And the and also is almost always more in-depth, more interesting, more relevant than the first answer.
And then in terms of the process, I guess you then have enough information that you can start to use that messaging in the copy and start to work on that side of things. Would that be fair to say?
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
So again, it's one of those, it depends on the project.
Yeah.
Answers. Most of the time, customer interviews are the richest source of information and voice of customer data, and that in most cases gives me enough to start working on the copy. And when I do that, start with the outline and then working on each page. And my favorite part is validation because, like, as a human being, you end up introducing your own biases anyway. So validation makes it easier to be like, okay, this is what I missed. This is what's on point. This is where we need to focus to get it closer to the, like, most ready to succeed version of the page.
How do you do and test that part then, the validation part?
So if it's a one page, or if we know that we have a lot of questions here, or we know that, for example, the decision around the offer was driven by like internal conversations, especially around like what a sales process should look like versus what customers would want. Because most customers don't want to talk to sales. Most prospects don't want to talk to sales. Nobody I know wants to talk to sales unless it's a burning problem they need to solve yesterday. And right now, this is not the market situation for most of SaaS companies. So if it's something very specific, then I like running messaging tests. So a full page feedback from target audience representatives. If it's more of a, we think this is what our website structure should look like, but we're still not sure if that would make sense to our audience, then user testing is a better option, because then you get to see how people get lost, confused, and frustrated before the website goes live, and you have actual prospects get lost, confused, and frustrated and leaving you.
How would you get people into testing that then? Would you use ads, or would you actually get current customers, or would you contact those kind of prospects that you contacted before and get them to use it? Like what's the, or if you tried all of these, what's the best way to go through that validation phase?
So I would not try to contact people that are already aware of the brand or have been interacting with the brand, just because that feedback will be biased by their previous interactions. I have not tried ads. That's an interesting idea, but it also sounds like a lot of extra effort.
And money.
And money, yeah. So if you're spending money in the first place, might as well go with existing services like Winter or user testing or Maze, whatever works. So
do you find, I haven't tried things like user testing. Have you found that you can get the right kind of prospects testing with user testing, or is it sometimes a bit too narrow?
So user testing tends to frustrate me every time I'm on their website, because they hide their pricing and force you into talking to them. And there's enough alternatives. I don't feel like I have to. My favorite in terms of segmentation and getting really granular with the audiences is Winter.
Winter. Okay.
Because it's all upfront. You already know more or less what are the segments that are available. You can just follow up and make sure they have the audience you want based on the industry. If not, well, you need to find something else. If yes, perfect, you already know what you're getting. With Maze, it's a little less granular, but I find that because I use Maze for like website structure testing, so it's more UX than copy anyway, I am okay with a slightly more fuzzy targeting.
Yeah, I wanted to shift gear onto the actual copy side of things a little bit. I wanted to talk about some practical tips and things like that, but before we do, could we just talk about maybe some common mistakes? Because I'm sure, there's things I'm doing, there's things that people listening are doing, where it's just you've seen it a million times. It's all too common, and something that people should just avoid doing. It should be interesting to hear your view on common mistakes you've seen.
So many. And I think it really comes down to the mindset. A lot of startups are, especially early stage, and this is normal. Like, this is not a mistake when you're an early stage startup, but as you start growing and you want your website to not just be there to kind of give you some extra weight, but to convert and be an engine for growth, that's when the early stage startup approach doesn't work. And the early stage startup approach in my world is me-focused copy. We're awesome. We're the future of the industry. These are the features you want, even if you don't know that you want them, but these are the features. So feature-focused, startup-focused, like, we are cool, work with us type of web copy.
So I guess making it more, and I guess this comes into the practical tips now, but I guess making it more about the user's problems and solutions and things like that, or like what are certain elements like that people should be focusing on, especially for like homepage copy for SaaS and things like that?
So I would say first, understanding what's the big problem you're trying to solve in words of your customers. Because when you're discussing your value prop internally, it makes sense. Like, everybody agrees that's a great value prop. But when you publish your website with that new value prop, sometimes your prospects are like, we're not sure what that means. Or they completely misread it and have a very different set of expectations about what the product does.
Which I guess is where that kind of that talking to the customers and understanding their language and their problems, but hearing it from their side, so you can kind of fit that language into what you're writing, I guess. Is that right?
Exactly. It can be as simple as, please, like, you work with us already. How would you describe our product to somebody who has never heard of it? And it may completely align with with the language you use to describe your product, or it may be totally different. And then, there's this mismatch between how you present yourself and what your existing customers take away from it.
Yeah, you mentioned on your website message market fit. I guess this is exactly where this comes into play, is it?
Yes. I think that, like, shiny objects in SaaS, they are everywhere, and one of those shiny objects is category creation. Like, why solve for differentiation and, like, fighting competitors or going against established competitors when you can just magically create this category and be the only product, and it's going to be amazing, except nobody gets what you do and why it matters. So, like, I understand the reasoning behind trying to be a category of one, but I think that in practical terms, this is not how prospects make their decisions, and this is not realistic anyway, because at the very least, you're competing with the status quo and inertia. And so it's already two competing solutions.
Because you will get some of that when you get people, in the social sphere saying, why compete with others when you can create your own category and things like that. But yes, it's obviously not easy. It's far from easy. But if people are trying to do that and you come in and realize, actually, this is not going to be easy, is there a direction you would, obviously it depends again, but is there a direction you would maybe tend to steer them in? Like, maybe take a very small subcategory of what's already there, so you're still competing, but you're doing one part of that better? Or like, how would you deal with that if someone's trying to create their own category?
That's a great question. And I think that in cases when I have strong feelings about, like, whether or not something makes sense, I tend to dig in a little deeper on those points during the research phase. Just anybody can have an opinion, but bringing back customer quotes, like walking us through their process of, we know we need to solve this problem, and this is what we've done, and these are the companies we have considered, shows that while this is a good aspirational goal in theory, right now you are competing with existing solutions, specific competitors, and are considered to be a part of this existing category. So basically, I just use customer research as a way to sneak in, how about we change this direction a little bit in the copy and like balance the we need leads now with the we would like to be a category defining solution later.
Yeah, that makes sense. Have you got any examples of maybe not necessarily SaaS, but maybe sticking with SaaS as that's where a lot of your expertise are, but any businesses like that you've seen copy from and you thought that's really well done, like basically some examples of companies who are doing copy really well?
So many. Like I do the swipe file series with little examples of things that I have not seen many other startups do, but that look lovely to me. Like it's either injecting humor or using rotating text in a way that actually kind of doesn't distract from the copy, or really speaking to the problem. So I tend to think in little, like, specific examples of everybody's doing this thing, but here's an example of what you could do instead. If I had to pick a large, well-known company that I love reading things from, I'd actually say Cards Against Humanity.
Oh, really?
Because all of that is so on point. It's so snarky, and like this would not work for B2B SaaS, which is probably why I love it so much.
I guess that's one where they kind of have to use humor as well.
Yes, and it's like a lot of times it's hard to use it for SaaS because it's not relevant. Right, okay, there's MailChimp that does it super well, but I cannot think of any other brand that's a great example of a thoughtful approach to a non-corporate tone of voice.
Do you think maybe some aren't using humor enough, or they're a bit too corporate sometimes, or do you think that's just given the B2B aspect of it, that's how they should be? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I'm a bit torn on this. As somebody who likes literally the worst marketer in the world video on LinkedIn, I know there is a potential for using humor in SaaS and for increasing brand awareness and for making people interested in following your company page on LinkedIn. So I know it should work, but with conversion copy, there is a diminishing return on being funny instead of clear. So a demo page is not the right place to be extra funny because you just want the visitors to be super focused on one thing. Schedule the demo. So I tend to, as much as I would love to say there is a ton of opportunity, we should all make our brands more fun and more exciting and possibly even snarky, which would be ideal, of course, in my world. I think that it's really more content than conversion copy thing. So homepage, yes. Product pages, maybe. But the closer you are to the main goal of the website, the more distracting it becomes. And so that's not something that I would recommend at that point.
Yeah, that does make sense. So, but what about? I mean, you mentioned demo pages. What about home pages? Do you think you can get away with a bit more there, or do you think it's actually just as important, if not more important, as as it's very often the first entry point, to just stick to conversion copy as opposed to just trying to engage people with humor or something like that?
Actually, homepage is probably the best place for being entertaining and engaging. The company that comes to mind is Descript. Their explainer video is awesome. Like all of the things that I struggle with when I record my videos, like they're right there. So that already makes me feel more inclined to keep scrolling. And another thing that I love on the Script website is the way they use social proof. So it's not just like a little logo proof bar, it's a non-trivial space taken up with customer testimonials, which not many B2B SaaS companies do well.
I haven't seen their video. I'll have to look at that. So are they using humor in that video, but around the problem that a lot of users are having? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they have maybe 3 or 4 different kind of video recording archetypes featured in the video, and they show like the before and after for each of them.
Yeah. For anyone listening who doesn't know, Descript is a tool that you can take video and audio, and you can easily edit it, like by chopping out words. So you can, if you're saying you can literally delete the word and it will remove that from the video and just flow quite naturally. It's a really, really good tool actually, but I haven't seen those videos or or probably their homepage for a long, long time, so I'll check that out. Have you seen, talking about video, because you see some people using video really well on their homepage or a landing page, but I'm particularly thinking about homepages at the moment. But some that aren't using it at all, some that aren't doing it very well. For RankCaddy, I think ours could be a million times better. It's like, at the moment, it's like a 20-minute demo video. It shouldn't be. Have you got any tips on what people should be doing with their videos, on how long they should be? Should they be focusing on the problem, but maybe trying to inject humor like the scripts have done? Are there any, like, a few examples of things you've seen working really well, as opposed to very long demos, or maybe something else that doesn't work well?
I would say that probably the biggest stumbling block is trying to be efficient and reuse the same video across all of the website pages, which makes sense if your goal is to reduce the amount of work before you push the website live, but doesn't make sense when you think about it from the viewpoint of your website visitors. So for the homepage, I would say anything over 5 minutes is probably a big ask for visitors that have just arrived. And if you're doing a video in your hero section on your homepage at all, then you need to make sure that the same points are addressed in your copy. Like, you can track how many people watch the video. You can safely assume it's not going to be 100% of them. So expecting that little video button to do the work of all of your hero section is just unreasonable, I would think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Have you got, when it comes to the actual conversion copy, bearing in mind let's take SaaS for example, we're trying to get people to sign up to a trial or book in a demo, whatever it might be. Have you got any other tips for things people should be doing and injecting into that copy and making sure they don't miss and they really think about when it comes to making that really conversion focused?
Yes. something that I don't see many startups pay a lot of attention to is objections. And again, it's more of like a startup me first approach, which is very normal, and it's very hard to break out of this kind of mindset. But I find that in many cases, prospects are much more skeptical than you would like to believe. They're much more distracted. They are not as invested in your product as you are, which is a no-brainer, but sometimes it's hard to remember this because this is your product and you care about it so much. So whenever like you're reviewing your copy internally, I would try and really focus on this makes sense to us, but if I were a prospect, what would make me feel less inclined to either believe this claim, take this action, or do the thing, or even scroll down the page?
What about things like features? Because and I guess this depends on how you put it across, but some people will talk a lot about features. But again, I guess you could argue that's talking about us, about the platform, about what it does, as opposed to the problem it solves. Do you think you can still talk about features, or should still talk about features, but in a different way, maybe like a way that solves problems, or should you not talk about that early on? Should that be reserved for like a features page or something like that?
Oh, you absolutely should talk about features. As long as you connect this to the benefits, and as long as you're not doing a feature dump, which strangely enough happens on many homepages. Your homepage is not the place to like list all of your features and then have little find out more buttons leading to a specific feature page. Unless you have really good reasons to believe that this is exactly what your website visitors want. And I would say that also it depends on the audience. I know, like in my experience, developers are very unhappy when somebody tries to market at them. So for a website that specifically targets developers, and developers are the ones making decisions, and developers are the ones doing research, and no like other stakeholders are involved, it might be a perfectly reasonable thing to just do the features. This is the product, this is what it does, you know you want it, here's the button. But if there's other folks involved, they might have a very different take on what matters to them during the consideration stage. And they might be less interested in what each specific feature does and more interested in what's the ROI, how does it help the company, and also like things like adoption, things like ensuring that everybody uses the product instead of buying something that sits unused. So this is a very long way of saying it depends on the audience and on the way decisions are made for most of those companies.
Makes sense. Before we wrap up, I'm talking to an expert on conversion copy. I'd be crazy not to at least bring up AI. It's probably a thorn in your side. I've said some positive and negative things about it. I'd just love to get your opinion on it. My view on it has been that I've used it for very well for idea generation and things like that, and even some practical things like creating Chrome plugins. When it comes to copy, it's been very hit and miss. I think most people will always say it has to be it should be heavily edited. But from, I've spoken to writers I know who have had real trouble with clients just saying, oh, we can write all our copy with AI now. And so it'd be interesting to see if you've been affected by this, with people thinking they can just do everything with AI, and just to get your opinion on the positives and negatives of AI as well.
I have not personally worked with companies that are completely switching to AI-generated everything. I had a client recently who did their copy through AI and then looked at it and were like, those are just placeholders. I guess we'll just need to work with somebody else who is a human person.
Yeah.
It's probably going to shake things up quite a bit, but probably not for conversion copy. And the reason why I think so is that conversion copy is first based on research, and this is something that is not out there to be grabbed online. So, like, from my understanding of how the current options work, it's based on what's already out there. So if you're already like making your copy decisions based on what your competitors have on their websites, I'm sure that using AI would speed up that process and make it easier for you to make those changes if and as needed. But if your goal is copy that's based on what matters to your customers, then I don't think you can expect this to happen without research and like combining all of those pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah, agreed. I think with I think it's going to get better, especially for informational type content, things like that. But things where there are feedback loops involved, like asking customers or potential customers questions, it's going to struggle. And where there's psychology involved as well. So things like conversion copy, I think you can't really replicate that. It may get better in the sense that it might be able to crawl more and learn more about the questions people are asking, the language they're using. But then, like you said earlier, those follow-up questions are really important. And you can't ask those when you're just scraping information from elsewhere. So yeah, I do agree with some things. It definitely shaped things up a lot with maybe CRO type things and conversion copy and things like that. I think we're probably a long way off that, jumping in and just replacing people.
I guess we'll find out. Interesting times.
We will, yeah. And any other quick tips before we wrap up? Obviously, we've been talking a lot about homepage copy, but whether it's homepage copy or landing page copy, any quick tips that just are really important for people to think about if they're delving in and trying to improve what they've got already?
Ooh, if you're trying to improve things, I don't know, maybe it's just the time of the year, but for me, the most burning tip right now is make calls based on data, not wildly guessing what might be wrong. Have analytics installed, track conversions, which should be obvious, but sometimes like things get lost. Understand how prospects interact with your page. So Hotjar or Clarity, whatever it is, if you don't know what's going on, you are just optimizing based on guesswork, which is a waste of time for you and will not bring you the returns you want anyway.
Awesome. Sam, this has been really useful. Where can people follow you, get in touch with you if they want to find out more?
I am not active on Twitter anymore. Twitter has been too interesting for me.
X now.
X now. Yeah. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me by looking for Ekaterina Howard. And it's also my website, ekaterinahoward.com. Most people struggle with spelling it, so I would start by LinkedIn.
I'll link to it in the show notes anyway, so it should be easy to click on.
Yeah,
And you often go by Sam, which is people may be confused, saying, "Why has he been calling her Sam?" But yeah, it's been great having you on, Sam. Thanks so much, and yeah, I'll link to those in the show notes. Thanks a lot.